There are moments in military history when the sound of silence speaks louder than the roar of guns. This story began on a sun-scorched morning at the Northern Frontier Training Base, a place where discipline was forged with iron and pride was broken with words.
But among the new recruits stood one man who neither flinched nor folded, Cadet Arav Mehta, a farmer's son from the plains of Rajasthan. Calm eyes, steady shoulders, a man of few words. He saluted with precision, worked with devotion, and never sought praise.
Captain Viraj Singh ruled the parade ground with absolute command. Every soldier stiffened at the sound of his boots. His words struck like thunder. His punishments followed like storms. To him, fear was the truest form of respect.
Viraj despised him instantly. To the captain, Arav's silence was not discipline, it was defiance.
And so began a silent war. Morning drills turned into endurance torture. Orders were doubled. Rest was halved. Yet Arav's face remained unreadable, his salute unbroken. The parade ground shimmered with heat. Boots stood frozen. Rifles gleamed. Breath held. Captain Viraj paced before Arav, voice slicing through the air. "Why do you never answer, Cadet Mehta? Are you deaf or simply proud?" No reply. He barked again, louder. "Speak, or I'll have you scrubbing latrines till sunset." Still silence. The captain's fury boiled. He stepped closer, face inches away, shouting, "You think you're better than your captain?" Arav's eyes didn't move. Only the faint whisper of his breath broke the stillness. Then Viraj slapped him. A sharp, echoing crack.
Every man froze. Even the wind seemed to stop. Arav did not blink. He simply stood at attention. Perfect posture, unwavering. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Captain Viraj's hand trembled. He had struck him, but it was his own pride that shattered.
The air around the parade ground turned heavy, thick with disbelief. No one dared to breathe. The captain, red with anger and shame, stared into the unflinching eyes of the cadet he could not break. Arav neither wiped the mark from his cheek nor looked away. He saluted, crisp, precise, and said quietly, "Permission to continue the drill, sir?" It was the only sentence he ever spoke that day. The captain said nothing. His voice had deserted him. He turned away, barking half-hearted orders, but every command now echoed hollow. The authority that once thundered through his tone had evaporated. That evening, as whispers spread through the barracks, something changed. Soldiers who once feared the captain began to look at him differently, not with awe, but with quiet pity. And when they saw Arav, they stood a little straighter. Later that night, the commandant summoned Viraj. "I heard there was an incident," he said slowly. "You struck a recruit." Viraj hesitated. "He provoked me with silence." The commandant studied him coldly. "Then it seems his silence held more strength than your rank." Those words crushed whatever arrogance remained in the captain.
The next morning, Captain Viraj stood before his men again. But now his gaze fell when it met Arav's. He gave a brief nod. Arav returned it, not in triumph, but in respect. From that day, no order of the captain was questioned, because discipline was no longer enforced by fear, it was inspired by dignity. Moral:
True power does not come from shouting commands or striking blows. It comes from control, from the quiet strength to stand tall when the world tries to crush you.
Years passed. Arav Mehta rose through the ranks with the same silent determination. By the time he became a major, his legend had already spread, whispered from barracks to academies across the nation. They called him the man who broke a captain without a word. Cadets studied historian not for strategy but for spirit. For every soldier knew now, the uniform demanded obedience, but respect could never be commanded. It had to be earned. As for Captain Viraj, he retired quietly, far from the parades he once dominated. In his final years, he often spoke of one man, the recruit who had taught him humility without saying a single word.
Once, during a military ceremony, a young officer asked Major Arav, "Sir, what gave you the courage to stay silent that day?" Arav smiled faintly and replied, "Because noise fades, Lieutenant, but silence echoes forever." The words hung in the air, timeless, immortal. And so the legend lived on, of the soldier whose silence silenced an empire of arrogance. Captain Hale didn't shout, he only smiled, a cold, predatory smile that told everyone this was about to become an example.
The order came swift. "Private Hensley, step forward." Daniel obeyed, his boots ground against the gravel. "Front and center," Hale barked. "If you refuse to follow my command, you'll do it in front of every man here." The soldiers shifted uneasily. No one dared meet Daniel's eyes. "Repeat after me," Hale said, voice sharp as steel. "The crate was present at 2300 hours." Daniel didn't move. "I said repeat it," Hale roared, stepping forward until their faces were inches apart. Then it happened, fast as a gunshot, quiet as a prayer. Hale reached for Daniel's collar, intending to yank him forward, a show of power. But before his fingers could close, Daniel stepped back with a controlled precision that froze the moment. His hand rose, not in defiance but restraint, stopping the captain's movement mid-air.
For an instant, time stopped. The captain's glove hovered, fingers trembling. The air between them burned with tension. Then Daniel spoke, low, steady, cutting through the heat. "Sir, I will not lie for you." The words fell like a hammer. Every man on that field knew what it meant to challenge a superior. It was career suicide, maybe even a court-martial. But no one spoke, no one moved. Captain Hale's hand dropped to his side. His face was pale, his authority cracked in the silence. The inspection ended without another word. The next day, Daniel was summoned to the command tent. The rumor spread through the camp like wildfire, that Hensley had been arrested, that he'd insulted the captain, that he'd be sent home in disgrace. But inside the tent, something different unfolded. At the center table sat Major Franklin Reeves, the battalion executive officer, an older man, quiet, silver-haired, his reputation built on fairness. Hale stood to his right, posture rigid, trying to mask his unease.
Reeves looked up. "Private Hensley," he said, "I've been told you refused a direct order during inspection. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Daniel replied. "Why?" "Because the order required me to falsify a report. I couldn't do that, sir." Reeves turned to Hale. "Captain, is this accurate?" Hale's jaw flexed. "The private misunderstood the context. I was confirming the details." Reeves raised a hand. "Enough." The tent went still. The major studied both men, then slowly reached for the inspection log. The ink on the last page was still fresh, but the handwriting didn't match Daniel's.
Reeves sighed. "Captain Hale, who wrote this entry?" Hale hesitated. "I completed it after the inspection, sir." "After the inspection," Reeves repeated softly. "Without the private's verification."
The weight of those words filled the air. Major Reeves leaned back, folding his hands. Gentlemen, command is not ownership, it's stewardship. Truth is not a matter of rank. He turned to Daniel. Private, you acted against an improper order. You will not be punished for that. Daniel saluted. Thank you, sir. Then Reeves turned his gaze to Hale. Sharp, measured, final. Captain, your authority depends on integrity. Without it, it's just noise. That afternoon, Hale was quietly relieved of field command, officially for administrative reassignment. Unofficially, every soldier knew what had happened.
When Daniel walked back through the camp, no one spoke at first, but eyes followed him, not in pity, but in something far heavier: respect. Sergeant Miller was the first to break the silence. You could have saved yourself a lot of trouble, kid. Daniel smiled faintly. Some things aren't worth saving, Sarge.
That night, a strange quiet settled over the tents. The same men who once joked about keeping their heads down began cleaning their gear a little differently. Orders were carried out with a new kind of precision, not out of fear, but out of conscience, because they had seen something rare, a man who didn't need rank to command respect.
2 decades later, long after the war had ended and medals had gathered dust in wooden boxes, the story of that morning inspection lived on. It was told in whispers among new recruits at Fort Benning, retold by old sergeants in classrooms and barracks. They called it the inspection of silence. Captain Robert Hale retired early, never rising beyond major. His name faded from reports, from records, from the lips of those who once feared him. But Daniel Hensley, though he never sought promotion, never gave interviews, never claimed heroism, became a quiet legend. His former comrades remembered him as the man who stood still when power shook. In 1963, during a training lecture at Fort Bragg, an instructor paused mid-lesson and said to a room of young cadets, "Leadership isn't about obedience. It's about conscience. Remember the soldier who refused to corrupt his honor."
That single sentence outlived every medal and commendation from that campaign. When Daniel retired years later, he was asked by a military historian if he regretted confronting his captain that day. He thought for a long moment before replying. His answer was calm, unadorned, the same tone he'd used under the Sun attorney. "Sir," he said, "a man can lose his post, his uniform, even his name. But once he lies to protect a wrong, he's already surrendered everything." And so, the story of Private First Class Daniel Hensley became one of those rare truths that history doesn't forget, because it speaks to something older than war, older than orders, older than men. It speaks of the thin, unbreakable line between power and honor, and the courage of one soldier who refused to let that line be erased.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories from Echoes of History.